He was a man who had everything a 9-figure net worth a penthouse overlooking Central Park, and the beautiful, much younger woman hanging on his arm. Tonight, Richard Vanderbilt was celebrating another successful acquisition. He'd chosen La Fenice, a restaurant so exclusive it felt like dining in a vault of old money. But as he scanned the room, a ghost from his past appeared. His ex-wife Catherine, the woman he'd discarded for a newer model, was sitting at the best table, and the man she was laughing with. None other than Alexander Sterling, the titan of tech, the one man in the city whose power could eclipse his own. In that instant, Richard's world tilted on its axis. The hunter had just become the prey. The chauffeured Maybach purred to a silent stop before the discreetly marked entrance of La Fenice. The doorman, a stoic figure named Albert, who had guarded this portal to the elite for 2 decades, moved with practiced grace to open the door. Richard Vanderbilt, a name synonymous with ruthless real estate development and old New York money, emerged first. He was a man sculpted by ambition, his suit a bespoke creation from a Savile Row tailor whose name was only whispered among the truly wealthy. At 52, he possessed a leonine confidence, his silver-streaked dark hair and piercing blue eyes projecting an aura of absolute control. He turned and extended a hand to his companion. Amber Dubois, a woman whose beauty was as striking as it was meticulously maintained, took it. She was 26, a former art gallery assistant, who now curated only one collection herself for Richard's viewing pleasure. Her dress, a shimmering sheath of crimson silk, clung to a figure honed by personal trainers and a diet of green juice and champagne. Her laughter, light and tinkling, was another of her carefully cultivated assets. "Oh, Ricky, it's divine," she breathed, her eyes wide as she took in the restaurant's opulent interior. La Fenice was less a public dining space and more a private club for the gods of finance and industry. The walls were palled in dark, lustrous mahogany, adorned with original oil paintings from Dutch masters. Each table was an island of intimacy, bathed in the soft, flattering glow of a crystal chandelier that dripped diamonds of light from the coffered ceiling. The air hummed with the quiet murmur of power, the clinking of heavy silverware on fine china, and the subtle scent of expensive perfume, and even more expensive wine. "Only the best for you, my dear," Richard said, his hand possessively on the small of her back. He navigated the room with the assurance of a man who owned it, which in a metaphorical sense he did. He had brokered the deal that saved this very building from demolition a decade ago, a fact he never tired of recounting. He nodded curtly at a banking magnate here, offered a tight smile to a shipping tycoon there. These were his peers, his rivals, the members of the gilded cage he had so masterfully constructed around himself. The maitre d', a sleek Italian man named Lorenzo, with the discerning eyes of a hawk, approached them with a deferential bow. "Mr. Vanderbilt, a pleasure as always. Your usual table is ready." "Thank you, Lorenzo, and a bottle of the 96 Petrus to start." Richard didn't need to see a wine list. He knew its contents better than he knew the birthdays of his own children. As they were led to a secluded corner booth, upholstered in plush velvet, the color of a midnight sky, Amber's hand tightened on his arm. "Everyone is looking at us," she whispered, a thrill in her voice. "Let them look," Richard replied, a smirk playing on his lips. He enjoyed the envy. It was a currency as valuable as the stocks in his portfolio. He was Richard Vanderbilt, and this was his kingdom. Amber, with her youth and flawless beauty, was merely the latest jewel in his crown, a testament to his enduring virility and power. He thought with a fleeting and dismissive pang of Catherine, his ex-wife, the mother of his two now grown children, Elizabeth and William. Catherine, who had been there before the billions before the Vanderbilt Tower scraped the Manhattan skyline. She had been his partner in the truest sense of the word, her quiet intelligence and unwavering belief in him a crucial scaffold during his early precarious climbs up the ladder of success. But as his empire grew, so did his appetites. Catherine, with her sensible shoes, her love of gardening, and her gentle, unassuming nature, had started to feel inadequate. She was a comfortable armchair in a life that now demanded a throne. Their divorce had been a brutal, drawn-out affair, a masterpiece of legal warfare. He had been generous, of course, in the way a king might toss a coin to a beggar. He had given her the sprawling Connecticut estate, a beautiful prison he no longer wished to inhabit, and a settlement that would ensure she never had to worry about money again. But he had taken her dignity. His affair with a string of younger women, culminating in his very public relationship with Amber, had been a deliberate act of cruelty, a message to the world and to Catherine herself that she was no longer relevant. He had expected her to crumble to retreat into a quiet life of suburban obscurity, a tragic footnote in his glorious biography. And for a time it seemed she had. The first year after the divorce had been marked by silence. His children reported that she was fine, a word so bland it confirmed his assumptions. She was probably tending her roses, her spirit, as pruned and contained as her beloved hydrangeas. The sommelier arrived with the Petrus, presenting the bottle as if it were a holy relic. The ritual of the tasting, the swirl of the deep garnet liquid in the crystal glass, the heady aroma of black truffle and ripe plum brought Richard back to the present. He took a sip, the wine's velvety texture coating his tongue. It was perfect. Everything in his life was perfect. "To us," he said, raising his glass to Amber. "To us?" she echoed, her eyes reflecting the candlelight. She was a perfect companion, beautiful and uncomplicated. She didn't challenge him. She didn't know the man he had been, only the monument he had become. She didn't see the cracks in the marble. He settled back into the plush velvet, the wine warming his veins. He felt invincible, a modern-day emperor in his chosen Colosseum. He was about to regale Amber with the story of his latest corporate conquest, a hostile takeover that had left a rival weeping when his gaze drifted across the room. It was a casual proprietary scan, the glance of a king surveying his subjects. And then he saw her. It was like a glitch in the matrix, a discordant note in a perfectly composed symphony. At the restaurant's most coveted table, the one nestled in a discreet alcove with a panoramic view of the city lights, sat Catherine. But it wasn't the Catherine he remembered. The woman he saw was not the subdued, heartbroken figure he had painted in his mind. This Catherine was radiant. Her mousy brown hair, which she had always worn in a practical shoulder-length cut, was now a cascade of rich honey-blonde waves that framed her face in a soft, glamorous style. She was wearing a dress the color of sapphire, a simple yet elegant silk slip that shimmered under the soft lights, showcasing a figure that was leaner and more defined than he recalled. Her only jewelry was a pair of delicate diamond earrings that caught the light as she laughed. And it was the laugh that truly stunned him. It wasn't the polite, restrained chuckle he was used to. This was a genuine, unrestrained peal of joy, a sound that filled the space around her with warmth and vitality. Her head was tilted back, her eyes sparkling with amusement. She looked vibrant, confident, and utterly, devastatingly beautiful. a beauty he had either forgotten or perhaps had never truly seen. The shock was a physical blow winding him. The Petrus in his hand suddenly felt like lead. His meticulously constructed world for the first time in a very long time felt unstable. It was as if a character from a forgotten chapter of his life had walked onto the wrong stage, wearing the wrong costume and speaking the wrong lines. "Ricky." "What is it?" Amber's voice, usually a soothing balm, was now an irritating buzz in his ear. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "In a way I have," he murmured, his eyes still locked on his ex-wife's table. But it wasn't just Catherine's transformation that held him captive. It was the man she was with. He was a man Richard knew not just by reputation, but by sight. Alexander Sterling, the CEO of Aura, the revolutionary tech firm that was changing the face of artificial intelligence. Sterling was the new money, the Silicon Valley prodigy who had stormed New York and was now a major player in Richard's own world. He was younger than Richard, in his late 40s, with a sharp, intelligent face, an athletic build that spoke of disciplined mornings in the gym, and an air of quiet intensity that many found intimidating. Richard had dismissed him as a geek, a coder who got lucky, but he couldn't deny the man's power. Aura's stock was soaring, and Sterling's influence was spreading like wildfire through the city's financial and social circles. He was the future, a future that Richard, with his old-world real estate empire, was beginning to feel threatened by. And this man, this titan of the new age, was leaning in close to Catherine, his expression one of rapt attention. He wasn't just dining with her, he was captivated by her. He listened as she spoke, his eyes never leaving her face. He laughed at her jokes. He reached across the table and briefly, gently touched her hand. It was a gesture of such easy intimacy that it sent a spear of pure, unadulterated jealousy through Richard's heart. The narrative he had so carefully crafted for himself began to unravel. Catherine, the discarded wife, the relic of his past, was not supposed to be here in the heart of his kingdom, looking like a goddess and dining with a man who represented everything that was a threat to his dominance. She was supposed to be in Connecticut, tending her roses, mourning the loss of him. "Is that Catherine?" Amber asked, her voice laced with a mixture of curiosity and a dawning cat-like suspicion. She had seen photos, of course, but the woman in the pictures was a pale shadow of the creature across the room. "Yes," Richard said, his voice tight. "She looks different." Amber observed her tone carefully, neutral. "Yes?" He repeated the word, a stone in his throat. He watched as Alexander Sterling signaled for the waiter. The two of them were sharing a bottle of wine, but it wasn't a flashy, ostentatious label like his Petrus. It was a more subtle, sophisticated choice, a burgundy that spoke of a connoisseur's palate, not a showman's ego. The entire scene was a masterclass in understated elegance and power, a stark contrast to the conspicuous consumption he was engaged in with Amber. Suddenly, his own booth felt gaudy. Amber's crimson dress seemed too loud, her laughter too shrill. The Petrus, which moments ago had tasted of victory hour, tasted of ash. He felt a desperate, primal urge to reassert his dominance, to walk over to that table and remind Catherine and this sterling pretender just who he was. He wanted to see the light in her eyes, dim, to see that confident smile falter. He wanted to reclaim his power, but he was paralyzed. For the first time in his adult life, Richard Vanderbilt did not know what to do. The ghost at the feast was not just his ex-wife. It was the ghost of a life he had thrown away, a woman he had underestimated, and a future that was suddenly terrifyingly uncertain. The hunter surveying his domain had suddenly realized he was not the only predator in the jungle, and the prey he thought he had left for dead was now dining with a lion. The vast, opulent space of La Fenice suddenly felt claustrophobic, the air thick with unspoken tensions. Richard found himself unable to tear his gaze away from Catherine's table. Every laugh she shared with Alexander Sterling, every shared glance, was a fresh torment. He dissected their body language with the obsessive focus of a general studying enemy movements. The way Alexander leaned in when she spoke, the easy grace with which she refilled his water glass, the comfortable silence that fell between them, it all pointed to a level of intimacy that sent a cold dread seeping into Richard's bones. "Are you even listening to me?" Amber's voice, sharp and edged with impatience, finally broke through his trance. He turned to her, his expression still clouded. "What?" "I was telling you about the charity gala, the one Cassandra is organizing. I need a new gown, something spectacular." Her words were a meaningless drone, the concerns of a world that had ceased to matter in the last 10 minutes. "Fine. Get whatever you want," he said dismissively, his eyes already drifting back across the room. Amber's perfectly sculpted brows furrowed. "Ricky, what is wrong with you? You've been staring over there all night. It's rude. People are noticing." "I don't care what people think." He snapped the words, coming out harsher than he intended. "You always care what people think," she retorted, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "This is about her, isn't it? Your ex-wife." "It has nothing to do with her." He lied, the falsehood feeling clumsy and transparent even to himself. He took a large swallow of the Petrus, hoping the expensive wine could somehow wash away the bitter taste of jealousy. It didn't. The evening, which had started with such promise, devolved into a tense, silent ordeal. Richard picked at his food, a beautifully prepared Dover sole that might as well have been cardboard, while Amber lapsed into a sullen silence, her phone held up as a shield. The atmosphere at their table was glacial, a stark contrast to the warmth and conviviality emanating from the corner alcove. Richard felt a growing irrational anger. How dared she be happy? How dared she move on? Not just to a new life, but to a better one. It was a betrayal of the narrative he had written for her for them. She was supposed to be the tragic figure, the one left behind. Her happiness felt like a personal insult, a judgment on his choices. As if sensing his turmoil, Lorenzo the maitre d' materialized at his elbow. "Is everything to your satisfaction, Mr. Vanderbilt?" he asked, his voice a low, discreet murmur. "Everything is fine, Lorenzo," Richard said through gritted teeth. But then a thought, cold and calculating, slipped into his mind. "Lorenzo? Who is that gentleman with Mrs. Vanderbilt?" He used her old name deliberately, a petty assertion of his past claim on her. Lorenzo, the soul of discretion, did not bat an eye. "That is Mr. Alexander Sterling, sir, of Aura." "I know who he is," Richard said impatiently. "Are they regulars?" "Mr. Sterling dines with us occasionally. Mrs. The lady has been in with him a few times over the past several months." Several months. The words hit Richard with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a first date. This was a relationship. A real established relationship that had been unfolding right under his nose in the heart of his own city. The carefully constructed walls of his self-assurance began to crumble. The inevitable moment arrived. Catherine and Alexander Sterling had finished their meal. As Sterling settled the bill, Catherine rose from her seat, her movements fluid and graceful. She smoothed down her sapphire dress and turned her gaze for the first time that evening, sweeping across the room. And then her eyes met Richard's. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The ambient noise of the restaurant faded into a dull roar. He saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes, a brief, unguarded moment of recognition. But it was quickly replaced by something else, a cool, unreadable composure. There was no pain, no anger, no lingering affection. There was nothing. It was the calm, polite neutrality one might afford a distant acquaintance. And that, more than any outburst or accusation, was what truly gutted him. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of cool acknowledgement, before turning her attention back to Alexander, who was now standing beside her. He placed a light hand on her back, a gesture both protective and proprietary, and began to guide her towards the exit. Their path would take them directly past Richard's table. The air crackled with anticipation. Richard's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt a primal need to say something, to do something, to shatter her composure and force a reaction. Amber, sensing the impending collision, sat bolt upright, her eyes wide, a spectator at a drama she was only just beginning to understand. As they drew level with the booth, Alexander Sterling paused. He turned his head and looked directly at Richard, his expression calm and steady. "Vanderbilt," he said, his voice even and devoid of any discernible emotion. It was a simple acknowledgement, yet it carried the weight of a gauntlet being thrown down. Richard, caught off guard by the direct address, could only manage a curt nod in return. "Sterling." Catherine's gaze followed Alexander's. She looked at Richard, then her eyes flickered for a fraction of a second to Amber, taking in the crimson dress, the youthful face, the whole tableau of his new life. A ghost of a smile, enigmatic and faintly amused, touched her lips. "Richard," she said, her voice as smooth and cool as polished marble. It was the first time she had spoken his name in over 2 years. The sound of it from her lips was both foreign and painfully familiar. Then she turned and walked away, her head held high, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and shattered assumptions in her wake. Alexander Sterling gave Richard one last long look, a look that was both a challenge and a dismissal before following her. Richard sat frozen in his booth, the remnants of his Dover soul congealing on the plate before him. The king was still in his castle, but his walls had been breached. He looked at Amber, but saw only a pale imitation of the woman who had just walked out of his life for a second time. "Well," Amber said, breaking the heavy silence, her voice dripping with a newfound sarcasm. "That was educational." Richard didn't answer. He was watching the door through which Catherine and Alexander had disappeared, a cold, terrifying thought solidifying in his mind. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost a war he hadn't even known he was fighting. And in the world of Richard Vanderbilt, losing was not an option. The shock was now hardening into something far more dangerous, a burning, obsessive need for retribution. The drive back to Richard's penthouse was a study in frigid silence. The opulent interior of the Maybach, usually a cocoon of comfort and luxury, felt like a tomb. Amber stared out the window at the glittering, indifferent city lights, while Richard replayed the scene at the restaurant, over and over in his mind, each viewing adding a fresh layer of humiliation and rage. Catherine's cool composure, Sterling's confident demeanor, the effortless intimacy between them. It was all a personal affront, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to mock him. He stormed into the penthouse, shrugging off his jacket and tossing it onto a ridiculously expensive chaise lounge. The apartment, A sprawling duplex with panoramic views of Central Park was his sanctuary, a monument to his success. But tonight it felt hollow, the vast, empty spaces echoing his own inner emptiness. "I need a drink," he announced, to no one in particular, striding over to the marble-topped bar. He ignored the vintage cognacs and single-malt scotches, instead reaching for a bottle of vodka. He poured a generous measure into a crystal tumbler, forgoing the ceremony of ice or mixer, and downed it in one fiery gulp. Amber watched him from the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. The pouty, petulant woman from the restaurant had been replaced by someone with a harder, more calculating edge. "So are you going to tell me what that was all about?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Or are you just going to drink yourself into a stupor?" "It was nothing," Richard grunted, pouring another drink. "A chance encounter. It means nothing." "It didn't look like nothing, Ricky," she shot back, stepping further into the room. "The way you looked at her. I've never seen you look at me like that." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. "You look at me like I'm a prize. You looked at her like she was the one who got away." "Don't be ridiculous," he scoffed, but the words lacked conviction. Amber's observation was too close to the bone. "And him," she continued, her voice rising. "Alexander Sterling, the one person in this city who doesn't seem to be intimidated by you. She left you, and she's with him. That's what's really eating you, isn't it? It's not about her. It's about your ego. It's about him." Her words were a slap in the face, a brutal, unwelcome truth. He whirled around, his eyes blazing. "You don't know what you're talking about. You know nothing about my life, about my marriage. I know what I see." Amber's voice was now a furious shout. "I see a man who thought he had it all, who thought he could just discard a woman like an old suit, and is now having a full-blown meltdown because she dared to find happiness with someone else. Someone better." The word better was a poisoned dart. "Get out," Richard said, his voice low and dangerous. "What?" "I said, get out," he roared, pointing a trembling finger towards the door. "Go back to your little apartment that I pay for with the clothes I bought you, and leave me alone." Tears of rage and humiliation welled in Amber's eyes. She stared at him for a long moment, her beautiful face a mask of fury. "You know what, Richard? For the first time, I actually feel sorry for her. She escaped. I'm just living in the prison she broke out of." With that, she turned on her heel, snatched her purse from the counter, and stormed out, slamming the door behind her with a resounding crash that seemed to shake the entire penthouse. Left alone in the cavernous room, Richard sank onto a leather sofa, the anger draining out of him, leaving behind a cold, heavy dread. Amber was right. His rage was fueled by a toxic cocktail of wounded pride, jealousy, and most terrifyingly a dawning sense of his own obsolescence. Sterling was the future. He was the past. Catherine's alliance with him felt like a definitive statement on his own relevance. His mind, conditioned for decades to treat every problem as a business challenge, immediately began to strategize. He needed information. He needed leverage. He needed to understand the dynamics of this new reality so he could find a way to disrupt it. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It belonged to a man named Harrison Vance, a private investigator who operated in the gray areas of the law, a specialist in digging up the kind of dirt that could ruin reputations and topple empires. Vance was expensive, discreet, and utterly without scruples. "Vance," a gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "It's Vanderbilt," There was a slight pause. "Richard, it's been a long time. I trust you're not calling to reminisce about old times. I need information, Harrison, on two people. My ex-wife, Catherine Vanderbilt, though she may be using her maiden name, Davies, and a man named Alexander Sterling." "Sterling of Aura." Vance sounded intrigued. "Flying high these days. What do you want to know?" "Everything," Richard said, his voice a low growl. "Their relationship, how they met, how long they've been seeing each other. His financials, his business dealings, any vulnerabilities. And her. I want to know what she's been doing for the past 2 years. Every detail. I want to know who her friends are, where she goes, what she does. I want to know her." He wanted to understand the woman she had become, the woman who had captivated a man like Sterling. He needed to find the chink in her armor, the weakness he could exploit. "That's a deep dive, Richard. It'll be expensive." "I don't care about the cost," Richard said, his gaze fixed on the city skyline. "I want it done, and I want it done quietly. You know me, Richard. Quiet is my middle name." After hanging up, Richard felt a sliver of his old control returning. He was taking action, seizing the initiative. But as he looked out at the sprawling city, a new unsettling thought began to form. Why was Sterling interested in Catherine? A man like him could have any woman he wanted. Models, actresses, socialites. Why choose a divorced woman in her late 40s, a woman Richard himself had deemed unworthy? Was it possible there was more to this than just a simple romance? Was Sterling using her somehow? The thought was both repulsive and strangely comforting. If Catherine was a pawn in a larger game, it would make sense. It would restore the order of his world. But then another, more insidious thought crept in. What if Sterling wasn't using her at all? What if he saw in Catherine the very things Richard had overlooked or disdained: her intelligence, her quiet strength, her integrity? What if in his blind arrogance he had thrown away a diamond, only to see it picked up and polished by a more discerning eye? The thread of his well-ordered life had been pulled, and as Richard sat alone in his gilded cage, he could feel the entire tapestry beginning to unravel. The investigation into Catherine and Sterling wasn't just about gathering information anymore. It was about finding a way to stitch his world back together, even if it meant tearing theirs apart. A week later, a plain manila envelope devoid of any return address arrived at Richard's private office. Inside was a slim USB drive and a single sheet of paper with a typed message: "The first installment, HV." Richard dismissed his secretary. For the day, locked his office door and slid the drive into his laptop. The screen populated with files, surveillance photos, financial reports, and a detailed summary from Harrison Vance. He clicked on the summary. First, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The report began with Catherine. After the divorce, she hadn't crumbled as he'd expected. Instead, she had undergone a quiet, determined metamorphosis. She had sold the Connecticut estate, a move that surprised Richard. He had seen it as her gilded cage, her consolation prize. But she had clearly viewed it as a link to a past she wanted to sever. With a portion of the settlement money, she had established a non-profit foundation dedicated to providing scholarships and mentorship for underprivileged young women in STEM fields. The report detailed how Catherine had personally overseen every aspect of the foundation's creation, from drafting the charter to interviewing the first round of scholarship recipients. She had leveraged her old contacts from her pre-marriage career in university administration and had quickly built a small but respected organization. The photos Vance had included were not of a lonely, heartbroken woman. They showed Catherine in boardrooms at charity events, speaking at a university podium. She looked poised, engaged, and purposeful. The sapphire dress at La Fenice was not an anomaly. It was her new uniform. Then came the part he was truly waiting for: her connection to Alexander Sterling. They hadn't met at a gala or a society party. They had met at a tech conference where Catherine had been a guest speaker, presenting on the importance of diversity in tech innovation. Sterling had been in the audience. According to Vance's sources, he had been so immersed by her speech and the work of her foundation that he had approached her afterwards. Their first date had been a tour of her foundation's office, followed by a quiet dinner. Their relationship, Vance wrote, had developed slowly, organically, over the last 8 months. It was built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared interests. Sterling was a major donor to her foundation, but his involvement was more than just financial. He served as an informal advisor, connecting her with influential figures in the tech world and providing mentorship to her scholarship students. Richard felt a sour taste in his mouth. This wasn't a sordid affair or a cynical power play. It was a partnership. Sterling wasn't just attracted to Catherine's newfound glamour. He was attracted to her mind, her passion, her purpose. The very qualities Richard had come to find so domestic and unexciting. He turned his attention to the files on Sterling. The financials were as expected astronomical. Aura was a juggernaut, its stock price seemingly defying gravity. But Vance had dug deeper past the public filings and into the murkier waters of Sterling's business dealings. And there he had found something interesting. Aura was in the final stages of a secret high-stakes negotiation to acquire a smaller but incredibly innovative robotics firm called Kinetic Dynamics. The deal was worth billions and would solidify Aura's dominance in the AI and robotics space for the next decade. Kinetic Dynamics held key patents that would be revolutionary if integrated with Aura's AI platform. The acquisition was Sterling's passion project, the keystone of his long-term strategy. Richard leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. He knew Kinetic Dynamics. In fact, a subsidiary of Vanderbilt Properties held a significant, though non-controlling, stake in the company. It was a legacy investment, one he hadn't paid much attention to in recent years. But now, it was a weapon. A cold, brilliant idea began to form in his mind. As a major shareholder, he could potentially disrupt the acquisition. He could raise objections, demand a higher price rally. Other shareholders, and tie the deal up in a quagmire of legal and financial complications. He could make Sterling's life a living hell. He could bleed him, distract him, and maybe even kill the deal altogether. It would be a devastating blow to Aura and to Sterling personally. It was the perfect revenge. It wasn't a direct attack on Catherine, which would be messy and might backfire, making him look petty. This was business. It was a move on the corporate battlefield, a world he understood and dominated. It would hit Sterling where he was most vulnerable, his ambition, his legacy. And Catherine, as Sterling's partner, would be caught in the crossfire. Her newfound happiness would be inextricably linked to the fortunes of a man he was about to bring to his knees. The plan was audacious, ruthless, and deeply satisfying. It restored his sense of control, his belief in his own power. He was no longer the passive, humiliated observer in the restaurant. He was Richard Vanderbilt, the puppet master. And he was about to start pulling the strings. He picked up the phone and dialed his head of corporate strategy. "David," he said, his voice hard as steel. I want you to pull everything we have on a company called Kinetic Dynamics. I want a full breakdown of our shareholder rights and a list of every other major investor. We're going to war." The decision made a sense of calm settled over him. But as he looked at the photo of Catherine on his screen, smiling confident, standing at a podium, a flicker of doubt pricked at his conscience. The woman in the photo was a stranger to him, but she was also the mother of his children, the woman who had once shared his dreams. Was he really prepared to destroy her newfound happiness just to soothe his wounded ego? He pushed the thought aside. This was no longer about feelings. It was about power. In his world, there were winners and losers, and Richard Vanderbilt never lost. He closed the laptop, the faces of Catherine and Sterling, temporarily hidden from view. The game was afoot, and he was confident that he had just found his checkmate move. The Sterling revelation wasn't a defeat, it was an opportunity, and he would seize it with both hands. The boardroom at Vanderbilt Properties was Richard's sanctuary of power, his modern-day throne room. It was a space meticulously designed to intimidate. The 20-foot-long table, carved from a single piece of rare Brazilian mahogany, gleamed under a custom-designed constellation of recessed lights. The wall of glass behind his chair didn't just offer a view, it presented the city as his dominion, a sprawling map of his conquests. Before Alexander Sterling was due to arrive, Richard stalked the room like a caged panther, adjusting the position of a water carafe by a millimeter, ensuring the leather-bound blotter in front of his chair was perfectly aligned. He was not just preparing for a meeting, he was setting a stage for an execution. His legal team had assured him his position was solid. The motion to block the sale of Kinetic Dynamics to Aura was a masterpiece of corporate legalese filled with plausible deniability and ostensibly sound financial reasoning. It was a declaration of war disguised as prudent business. In his mind, the scenario was clear. Sterling would arrive angry and blustering. Richard would remain calm, imperious, a stone wall of corporate procedure. He would watch the tech wunderkind, the man who had stolen his past, slowly realize he was out of his depth, entangled in a game whose rules were written by old money and ruthless ambition. Richard craved that moment of dawning fear in Sterling's eyes. It was a hunger that had gnawed at him for a week. When his private secretary announced Sterling's arrival, Richard took a deep breath, settled into his high-backed leather chair, and steepled his fingers, the picture of untouchable authority. Alexander Sterling entered the room alone. There was no entourage of lawyers or aides. He was dressed in a simple, exquisitely tailored dark grey suit, a stark contrast to Richard's power pinstripes. He carried a slim leather portfolio and moved with an unhurried grace that was a quiet statement of confidence in itself. His presence didn't disrupt the power dynamic of the room. It simply ignored it. He was not a supplicant entering a king's court. He was an equal. He walked to the opposite end of the long table and stood for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the panoramic view before turning to Richard. "An impressive view, Richard." Sterling began, his voice calm and resonant, easily filling the cavernous space. The use of his first name was a subtle yet effective parry to the room's intended intimidation. It's easy to feel like a god from up here, but you have to be careful. The heights can make you forget what's happening on the ground. Richard bristled at the veiled condescension. "I'm a busy man, Sterling. I appreciate the architectural commentary, but my time is valuable. I assume you're here about Kinetic Dynamics." "I am," Sterling replied, taking a seat. He didn't wait to be invited. "Your motion to block the acquisition is creative. a lot of impressive legal jargon to say you want to cause trouble. I have a fiduciary duty to my company's shareholders. Richard recited the words, feeling hollow even to him. Your offer for Kinetic, while superficially attractive, undervalues the company's long-term patent portfolio. I believe a more competitive bidding process would yield a higher return for everyone. It's just business. Sterling met his gaze, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. Let's not insult each other's intelligence, Richard. This isn't about business, and we both know it. You've held that non-controlling stake in Kinetic for 12 years and haven't attended a single shareholder meeting. Your own analysts recommended divesting it 2 years ago. Your sudden, passionate concern for its patent portfolio appeared exactly 48 hours after you saw me having dinner with Catherine. The directness of the attack was jarring. Richard had expected a dance, a series of feints and parries. Sterling had simply walked to the center of the ring and thrown a haymaker. This has nothing to do with my ex-wife. Richard snapped his voice, a low growl. And I would advise you to leave her out of this conversation. I can't, Sterling said, his voice losing its light edge and taking on the hardness of forged steel, because she is the entire reason for this conversation. You saw her looking happy, looking powerful, and you couldn't stand it. You couldn't attack her directly. That would look petty even for you. So you came after me using your shares in Kinetic as a cudgel. You're willing to sabotage a multi-billion-dollar deal that is crucial for the future of technology, a deal that ironically would significantly increase the value of your own investment, all to soothe your bruised, pathetic ego. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing Richard's carefully constructed armor of self-importance. You are arrogant and presumptuous. Richard spat his face, flushing. You waltz into my city, my world, and you think you understand me. You think you understand the woman I was married to for 25 years. No, Sterling conceded, leaning forward. I don't pretend to understand the man you are. But I have spent the last 8 months getting to know the woman you threw away. I know she is brilliant. I know she is resilient. And I know she is a better strategist than you are. You underestimated her then, and you are making the grave mistake of underestimating her now. You see, you think this is your game, your table. He gestured to the mahogany expanse between them. You're wrong. You've been playing her game from the moment you walked into that restaurant. He reached into his briefcase, retrieved the thin leather portfolio, and slid it with deliberate tool-lowness across the vast, polished surface. It stopped directly in front of Richard. Before you detonate this grenade you've built, I thought you should see the blast radius. I thought you should see the board. With trembling hands, Richard opened the portfolio. The title page read, The Davies Center for Innovation, a proposal for the West Side Yards development. His blood turned to ice. The West Side Yards, the sprawling 16-acre plot of post-industrial wasteland that was to be his magnum opus, his legacy project. He had spent millions on lobbyists, architects, and backroom deals trying to secure it. The bidding process had been secretive, brutal, and he had been confident that his final offer, submitted just last month, was unbeatable. He flipped through the pages, his horror mounting with each one. He saw architectural renderings of a stunning, state-of-the-art campus, a harmonious blend of glass, steel, and green space. He saw a detailed business proposal that was nothing short of visionary. It wasn't just another soulless glass tower of luxury condos. It was a symbiotic ecosystem, a partnership between Catherine's non-profit foundation and a commercial tech incubator. The plan promised thousands of high-paying jobs, educational partnerships with city universities and public community spaces. It was a developer's dream and a politician's fantasy. How he finally whispered, looking up at Sterling, his mind reeling. The bidding was sealed. My offer was immense. Your offer was about money. Sterling explained, his voice patient like a teacher explaining a complex problem to a slow student. Catherine's offer was about value. She knew you wanted that land. She's been listening to you talk about it for a decade. She knew your plan was to build another monument to yourself, another sterile enclave for the global elite. So she spent a year quietly working on a better idea. He detailed the strategy with surgical precision. Catherine had leveraged her foundation's sterling reputation and her own academic contacts. She had personally met with community boards, listening to their concerns. She had courted the city council members Richard had tried to bully. She presented them not with a pile of money, but with a vision for the city's future. A future of innovation, not just empty real estate. The mayor called her proposal the most exciting urban development project of the 21st century. Sterling continued twisting the knife. While you were focused on your hostile takeovers and your trophy girlfriends, Catherine was changing the city. The development rights for the West Side Yards were awarded to the Davies Foundation 2 weeks ago. The announcement is pending. Richard felt the air leave his lungs. He had been so consumed with his petty act of revenge against Sterling that he had missed the main event. He'd been laying a snare for a rabbit, oblivious to the fact that a pack of wolves was surrounding him. "And here's the master stroke, Richard," Sterling said, leaning in for the final fatal blow. "What do you think is the anchor tenant for the commercial wing of the Davies Center, the flagship company that will draw other innovators and validate the entire project?" He paused, letting the silence stretch. "It's kinetic dynamics. Their primary robotics lab will occupy the 3 central buildings. The entire financial model of the Davies Center, Catherine's entire vision, is predicated on my acquisition of kinetic being successful. The deal is symbiotic. The 2 projects are inextricably linked." The trap was sprung. The genius of it was breathtaking in its cruelty. If he pursued his attack on Sterling's acquisition, he wasn't just a bitter corporate raider. He would be the man who personally, publicly, and maliciously destroyed the life's work of his ex-wife, the mother of his children. He would be torpedoing a beloved city project, confirming every caricature of him as a greedy, destructive dinosaur. He would not just lose the deal. He would lose everything: his public standing, what little respect his children had left for him, his entire legacy. He was checkmated, utterly and completely. He stared at the documents, at the elegant building bearing the name Davies, a name she had reclaimed, a name now synonymous with vision and progress. "What do you want?" Richard asked, his voice a dry, rasping sound he barely recognized as his own. The bravado, the anger, the arrogance, it had all evaporated, leaving only the cold, stark reality of his defeat. "It's simple," Sterling said, his voice now devoid of malice, holding only the calm of absolute victory. "You will call your lawyers, and you will withdraw the motion against the kinetic acquisition. Unconditionally. Then you will walk away. The West Side Yards are no longer your concern. The Davies Center is no longer your concern. And Catherine is no longer your concern." Richard sat motionless for what felt like an eternity. The city lights began to glitter in the twilight outside his window, no longer symbols of his kingdom, but tiny, mocking eyes. He thought of Catherine, not the mousy woman he remembered, but the force of nature who had outmaneuvered him at every turn. He had tried to put her in a box, and she had responded by redesigning the entire city skyline. Finally, with a slow, crushing exhalation of breath, he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Fine." The word was the epitaph of his reign. Sterling stood, his objective achieved. He collected his portfolio, his movements crisp and efficient. He walked to the door, but paused with his hand on the handle, turning back to face the broken man at the head of the table. "You know, Richard, in all the time I've known Catherine, I've never once heard her speak ill of you," he said. His voice softened with something that might have been pity. "She talks about your early years, about the ambition she once admired. She says you gave her 2 wonderful children, Elizabeth and William, and that they are the best part of both of you. They, by the way, are both on the junior board of the foundation. They are immensely proud of what their mother is building." He let that final detail land. "She found her own purpose, Richard. I sincerely suggest you try to find one for yourself." The door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the cavernous, silent boardroom. Richard remained in his chair, a solitary figure, dwarfed by the symbols of his own hollow empire. The city glittered on, indifferent. He had sought to orchestrate a drama of power and revenge, but had instead been cast as the tragic, obsolete fool in a story of rebirth and triumph. He was Richard Vanderbilt, the man who had everything, and he had never felt so poor. The fallout from that day in the boardroom was not loud, but it was seismic. Richard, humbled and broken, withdrew his opposition to the kinetic dynamics deal. The acquisition went through, and the announcement of the Davies Center for Innovation was met with citywide acclaim. Catherine, no longer a ghost from the past, became a celebrated figure, a philanthropist and visionary in her own right. Richard's name was never publicly connected to the failed land bid. His defeat was a private, deeply personal humiliation. He and Amber parted ways, the illusion of their glamorous life shattered beyond repair. He was left in his penthouse, a king in a kingdom of one, forced to watch the woman he had discarded build a new world without him. He had sought a dramatic confrontation, a way to reclaim his power, but discovered true power isn't about control but creation. Catherine and Alexander didn't just win. They built something better. What happens when a man who has everything realizes he has nothing of value? This story is a glimpse into that brutal awakening. If you were captivated by this tale of love loss and the ultimate revenge of a life well lived, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a good story, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. What do you think Richard should do next? Let us know in the comments below. He was the dashing mogul every ambitious entrepreneur wanted to emulate. She was the poised, loyal wife who had stood by him from humble beginnings. No one would have guessed that behind the gated mansion's manicured lawns, betrayal festered like poison. Until one day, in a flurry of financial sabotage, he let his mistress cut off his wife's credit cards. It was humiliating, scandalous, and only the beginning of a whirlwind that would pit powerful business alliances against each other. In a boardroom confrontation that stunned everyone, the CEO himself stepped in, but not in the way anyone expected. Buckle up. This is the story of love, greed, and revenge. Jordan Alberts was not born into luxury. He grew up in a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Milwaukee, where he learned to hustle by selling candy bars door to door at the age of 10. Over the years, Jordan's unwavering determination and charm propelled him into better circles. First at a local startup, then into his own tech company that caught the eye of an angel investor. By the time he was 35, Jordan was a self-made millionaire, a prominent figure on various entrepreneurial boards, and had connections with people like Mark Cuban, Bill Gates, and a few top executives at Google. His wife, Elizabeth Alberts née Wagner, had been with him through everything. They met in college at a small tech entrepreneur club meeting, both bright-eyed and dreaming of changing the world. Elizabeth came from a modest background, too. Her father was a retired auto mechanic, and her mother a homemaker. She'd studied communications with an emphasis on public relations, and it was through Elizabeth's network of contacts that Jordan first gained access to small local pitch events. While Jordan pitched his innovative software for automating small business tasks, Elizabeth made calls, arranged coffee meetups, and tried to capture the interest of potential backers. They married in a little chapel by Lake Michigan. It wasn't a lavish wedding, no star-studded guest list, no fancy reception at the Ritz. But to Jordan and Elizabeth, it felt perfect. A union built on genuine love, unwavering support, and a shared dream of building a life and a business empire together. Over the next decade, they grew from a modest condominium in Milwaukee to a stunning estate in Austin near Lake Travis, with a sweeping view of the water and rolling Texas hills. It was there at a philanthropic event organized by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that Jordan's name landed on the radar of top-level investors. His company's smart automation technology was recognized for its potential to transform not just small businesses, but large-scale manufacturing and logistics. Soon after, Jordan's net worth skyrocketed from a mere $5 million to well over $200 million. For a while, everything was picture perfect. The marriage was strong, their personal synergy unwavering. Elizabeth handled some philanthropic duties, organizing events, acting as a goodwill ambassador for Jordan's brand, and forging new partnerships through her PR background. Their household staff adored them, describing Elizabeth as kind, gracious, and always mindful of the people around her. But money can be a seductive force, and success can open doors to darker temptations. Jordan began attending more exclusive networking events in Beverly Hills, New York, and beyond. Elizabeth was often at his side, but there were times she couldn't attend. Perhaps she was busy finalizing the details for a charity gala, or maybe she was simply burnt out from the unrelenting schedule. It was during these times, rare at first, then increasingly common, that Jordan got close to someone else. Her name was Ava Monroe. She was a rising star in the world of technology law, representing high-profile clients like Tesla, Amazon, and a few top-tier cryptocurrency exchanges. She had a reputation for being ruthless in negotiations, seductive in social gatherings, and unbelievably charming behind closed doors. The rumor mill started buzzing the moment Ava was seen at Jordan's table during a private dinner after a tech summit in Las Vegas. Elizabeth wasn't there. She had chosen to stay in Austin, meeting with a team of female entrepreneurs Jordan was mentoring. A few people whispered about Jordan's visible fascination with Ava, the way he leaned in whenever she spoke, how they clinked champagne flutes with an intimacy that suggested more than just business talk. No one knew for certain how fast or how deep it went, but soon the signs became undeniable. Lavish gifts appeared on Ava's social media, including a diamond bracelet, suspiciously similar to the ones Jordan's company had once gifted important clients. Photos emerged of Jordan and Ava at high-end restaurants in Manhattan, always carefully angled to obscure Jordan's face, though keen observers could still identify him by the sliver of a recognizable watch or the faint reflection in a mirrored wall. By the time the rumors reached Elizabeth, they were no longer rumors, but near-confirmed facts. She felt her chest tighten, her world spinning out of control. This couldn't be real. Jordan had always been a loyal partner. But the evidence was too compelling to deny. She confronted him in the privacy of their Lakeview mansion. At first, Jordan denied everything. Yet denial quickly turned into a half-hearted admission once Elizabeth presented him with photographic evidence. Like a skilled negotiator used to controlling deals, Jordan tried to manipulate the situation, insisting that Ava was just a business associate, someone he occasionally had dinner with. But Elizabeth saw right through it. She had always been adept at reading him. A chill settled over their once loving home. Elizabeth, determined to preserve her dignity, demanded they enter marriage counseling, or at the very least step away from high-profile events until they resolved their issues in private. Jordan nodded, providing non-committal answers. He had never liked therapy, never seen the point in discussing feelings with a stranger. He agreed to her wishes on the surface, yet beneath the facade, he continued his involvement with Ava, allowing the illicit relationship to take root. This was the calm before the storm. For soon Elizabeth's sense of betrayal would pale in comparison to the massive financial and emotional blow about to come her way. Weeks passed. Elizabeth tried to focus on her philanthropic work and personal projects, attempting to distract herself from the growing chasm between her and Jordan. When a local charity she sponsored invited her to discuss future donations, Elizabeth discovered something shocking. Her personal credit card was declined. Embarrassment washed over her in front of the unsuspecting staff. She tried another card. Sure, it must have been a glitch, but that too was declined. The staff politely suggested she call her bank, and Elizabeth excused herself with a polite smile, her hands trembling as she left the office. Elizabeth called the bank suspecting fraud or an administrative error, but the bank's representative informed her that both cards had been cancelled the previous week. Under their joint account, they were tied to Jordan's finances, and evidently Jordan had authorized the cancellation. It felt like a punch to the gut. Why on earth would Jordan cancel her cards without her knowledge or consent? They had never had major financial disputes. Elizabeth always had access to family funds, albeit responsibly. She dialed Jordan, but the call went straight to voicemail. She sent him several frantic texts. No response. Later that evening, Jordan came home exuding an air of tired disinterest. Elizabeth confronted him the moment he walked through the door. Under the chandelier's glow, which reflected in her tear-filled eyes, Jordan brushed aside her questions with a dismissive wave. "I needed to consolidate our finances," he said, removing his blazer. "You can use the joint checking account for a while." "No big deal, no big deal." Elizabeth's frustration swelled. "You cancelled my credit cards without even telling me what's going on. Are you punishing me for something?" Jordan's eyes flicked away nervously, and that was when Elizabeth realized he was lying again. The next words that came from his mouth were not only shocking, but also laced with a cruelty she never imagined he was capable of. "Ava suggested we revisit some of my expenses. She found that you were spending frivolously. It made sense to limit credit usage." Elizabeth's heart dropped to her stomach. Ava. That woman was now meddling in their finances. As if the affair wasn't enough, Jordan had allowed this mistress to encroach into an arena that Elizabeth believed was sacred, her own household stability. "What is Ava doing reviewing my spending? Since when does your fling get to decide what is or isn't frivolous?" Elizabeth spat tears, threatening to spill. Jordan made an attempt at a calming gesture, but his words only fanned the flames. "She's helping me restructure. Her firm has great insights into corporate finances. This is about the business, Elizabeth. It's not personal." Not personal. Elizabeth recalled how intimately personal their marriage had always been. They built every aspect of their lives together, from small decisions about wallpaper colors to big entrepreneurial leaps that demanded everything from both of them. Now Jordan was shutting her out, consulting Ava instead. In a quavering voice, Elizabeth demanded, "Reinstate my cards. I am your wife. I have a right to our finances, and you know I've never been irresponsible with money." Jordan's face hardened with a new arrogance. "Not until we finalize our restructure," he said, referring to some nebulous plan Elizabeth knew little about. "I'll handle everything in the meantime." That moment, that cold exchange, was a harbinger of the bigger heartbreak to come. If Jordan was letting Ava control such details, what other aspects of their marriage was he willing to let her sabotage? As the days turned into weeks, Elizabeth discovered one more blow after another. The monthly allowance she used to cover household expenses had been slashed without explanation. The staff, including her personal assistant, was laid off. Bills began piling up, addressed to her name, but with no means to pay them aside from groveling at Jordan's feet. Friends and family started to notice. Elizabeth tried to hide her shame. She confided in her sister Caroline, who was enraged at Jordan. "This is financial abuse," Caroline insisted. "You should speak to a lawyer." Elizabeth shuddered at the thought. She still believed they could salvage their relationship, that Jordan would snap out of whatever daze Ava had put him in. Yet a small part of her whispered that maybe Caroline was right. Then came a fateful meeting at a hotel conference suite in Los Angeles, one that Jordan had insisted Elizabeth attend. It was a gathering of major tech moguls, including Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, who were rumored to be there to discuss new tech innovations in global logistics. When Elizabeth arrived, she quickly realized something was off. She saw Jordan in the lounge area, standing far too close to Ava, exchanging hushed conversations. Seeing Elizabeth from a distance, Jordan slipped away discreetly, leaving Ava behind. Elizabeth approached her husband with a forced smile. "I'm here," she said, desperate to maintain composure. "What's the plan?" Jordan gave a curt nod. "There's a closed-door session for the key players only. You'll have to wait outside." In the past, Elizabeth had always been included in these key player sessions as Jordan's partner and PR advisor. The subtle exclusion burned her pride. She swallowed her anger. "Sure, I can wait." After hours of waiting, she found Jordan and Ava laughing together near the bar. As she approached, Jordan's phone buzzed, and he stepped away. That was when Ava turned a chilling smirk on her face. "You know Jordan's a visionary," Ava said, swirling the wine in her glass. "He needs someone who can keep up with him on all levels: business, ambition, excitement." Elizabeth felt her face flush with anger. "I've been by his side for years. We built this together." Ava gave a theatrical shrug. "Maybe in the past. But times change. People evolve. I guess you were too comfortable." Elizabeth clenched her fists, biting back a retort. She was determined not to make a scene in front of such influential people. But oh, how she wanted to lash out, to expose Ava for the home wrecker she was. Ava flicked her hair behind her shoulder, noticing Elizabeth's agitation. "Things will be better if you accept it," she cooed, as if offering advice to a friend. Jordan's moved on in more ways than one. The finances are just the beginning. Elizabeth's body went cold. She realized in that moment how truly precarious her situation was. Ava was not simply a fling. She was positioning herself as a partner in Jordan's professional and personal life. The credit cards were just one step in what looked like a systematic campaign to push Elizabeth out of everything she and Jordan had built. Still, Elizabeth refused to crumble. She left the event quietly, but her mind churned with rage and heartbreak. It was time for her to take action. She needed to protect herself, her assets, and her dignity. Little did she know that as she plotted her next move, Jordan and Ava were preparing a financial ambush that would push her to the brink. Only fate and an unexpected intervention by a certain CEO would alter the course of their twisted game. In the days after the Los Angeles conference, Elizabeth attempted to consult with attorneys. She picked up a referral from a friend who once worked with a high-profile divorce lawyer in New York. The initial phone calls were sobering, with Jordan's empire being primarily under his name and her credit cards cancelled. She had limited liquidity to hire top-tier representation. Even so, Elizabeth pressed forward. She managed to scrape together some funds from a personal savings account. Jordan had no access to money she had set aside from her early PR consulting days. It wasn't a large sum, but enough to secure a preliminary consultation. During that consultation, her lawyer, Michelle Liu, a bright and empathetic but hard-hitting attorney based in Houston, laid out the hard truth. Financial abuse and infidelity are serious grounds for divorce, Michelle said, scanning through Elizabeth's financial statements. But if Jordan's funneling money and assets into new accounts under his own name, or shifting resources to places you can't see, we need proof, and we need it fast. Elizabeth swallowed. She recounted Ava's involvement, how she was effectively orchestrating the restructuring. Michelle's pen scribbled quickly over a notepad. You have a right to half of the marital assets, Elizabeth, but it looks like your husband is 2 steps ahead. We must move quickly. The plan was to gather evidence of Jordan's wrongdoing and file a court order to freeze marital assets, ensuring Elizabeth had a fair shot. But as they began drafting documents and rummaging through what records, Elizabeth had an avalanche of shocking details surfaced. Jordan wasn't merely cancelling credit cards. He was transferring stocks from their joint portfolio into an account under his newly formed trust. He had changed the authorized signatory details for a few of their properties, effectively locking Elizabeth out. He was also taking out lines of credit against certain properties, presumably to fund new ventures that, as Elizabeth suspected, involved Ava. The emotional strain weighed heavily on Elizabeth. She couldn't sleep, her appetite waned. Each day felt like standing at the center of a storm. Yet if she thought this was the worst of it, she was mistaken. One evening, after finalizing some documents with Michelle, Elizabeth returned to her mansion to find her key card didn't work on the electronic locks. Pounding on the door, she shouted for the live-in staff if any were left. Seconds later, the door opened slightly, revealing Ava's face. "Jordan's not here," Ava said icily. "You should call next time." Elizabeth's heart hammered. "This is my home. Get out of my way," she demanded, trying to push past. But Ava slid in front of her, refusing to budge. "He told me you're not welcome here anymore until the legal mess is settled," Ava sneered. "I have every right to ask you to leave." Elizabeth was trembling with fury. "You have no rights here. You're the mistress, not the wife." With a cold laugh, Ava stepped aside and pointed at Elizabeth's luggage haphazardly placed in the foyer. "Jordan left these for you," she said. "He said to pack whatever else you need and let security escort you out if you refuse to leave." Elizabeth blinked away tears, her throat raw with outrage. She was being thrown out of her own home by the woman who had intruded into her marriage. That moment was a cruel epiphany. Jordan had not only cut off her finances, but now he was physically pushing her out of the place she had shared with him for years. Yet in all that darkness, a sliver of light emerged the next morning. Elizabeth received a phone call from a close mutual friend, Marcus O'Donnell, who worked with Jordan at a large tech conglomerate in Dallas. Marcus was someone Elizabeth trusted, an executive who had known Jordan since the early days. He had seen them build the company from the ground up. Elizabeth Marcus said, his tone urgent. "I don't know everything that's going on, but I heard from your staff that you've been locked out. There's a board meeting next week. Jordan wants to finalize some big decisions. If you can get to that meeting and talk to the chairman, maybe you can find some leverage." Elizabeth's breath caught in her chest. The chairman of this particular conglomerate was none other than famed CEO David Hartridge, known not just for his visionary leadership, but also for a strict code of ethics. Over the years, Hartridge had invested heavily in Jordan's business. He was the reason Jordan sat on that board. "He's not the type to meddle in personal affairs," Marcus warned. "But if Jordan's pulling stunts that compromise your share in the company, Hartridge might step in. He's big on fairness and hates scandal." It was the glimmer of hope Elizabeth needed. She thanked Marcus profusely. The plan was simple: attend the board meeting, confront Jordan in front of Hartridge, and present enough evidence of Jordan's wrongdoing to ensure the board and possibly the entire conglomerate would not stand for it. She spent the week gathering documents, bank statements, and text message screenshots that implicated Jordan in unscrupulous financial moves. Michelle Liu helped compile everything into a neat folder. "You need to be prepared for Jordan to lash out," Michelle warned. "He'll try to discredit you in front of the board." Elizabeth nodded her determination, overshadowing her fear. She practiced her speech, reciting it in the mirror of her modest hotel room, where she had temporarily moved. Heart pounding, she told herself that if there was ever a time to fight, it was now. Finally, the day of the board meeting arrived. Elizabeth dressed in a sleek black pantsuit that radiated confidence. She walked into the corporate skyscraper in downtown Dallas, her chin held high despite the knot in her stomach. She spotted Jordan in the corridor, flanked by Ava and a couple of the board members. As soon as he saw Elizabeth, his expression darkened. "You're not supposed to be here," Jordan said, trying to keep his voice low. Elizabeth raised her chin. "I'm still an investor in your company. I hold shares. So yes, I'm attending the board meeting." Ava stepped in with a condescending smile. "Don't make a scene, Elizabeth. This meeting is for serious stakeholders." "I am a serious stakeholder," Elizabeth retorted, voice steady. "I'm your wife, still legally, and I'm half of this empire's foundation." Behind them, a tall figure approached CEO David Hartridge himself, a man in his 50s with graying temples and a firm handshake. He regarded Elizabeth with polite curiosity. "Ms. Alberts, I presume?" Elizabeth nodded, handing over her invitation papers and a letter from her attorney, which stated that she possessed partial shares. Hartridge studied the documents, then gave a curt nod indicating she was allowed to attend. Jordan shot Elizabeth a glare that spoke volumes. You have no idea what you're getting into. But Elizabeth did. She was here to preserve her dignity, her livelihood, and the legacy she had helped build. The meeting commenced in a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Dallas skyline. The board members sat around a large mahogany table, exchanging pleasantries about the upcoming quarter's projections. Jordan made a short presentation on a new partnership with a logistics firm, highlighting expansions and new contracts. A few board members clapped. Then came time for open discussion. Elizabeth raised her hand, clearing her throat. "I'd like to address some concerns about the financial structuring Jordan is proposing." She began, her voice reverberating across the silent room. Jordan's face reddened. Ava, seated beside him, tried to intervene. "We should keep personal matters out of board discussions," she said. But Elizabeth pressed on, raising the folder of evidence. "These changes aren't just personal," Elizabeth said. They could affect company stability. Jordan is funneling resources into a new trust, making questionable decisions without transparency. I have documents signed by him with references to Ms. Ava Monroe, demonstrating a conflict of interest that could potentially compromise investor trust. A hush fell over the room. Hartridge's brow creased. "Jordan, is this true?" Jordan stood, scrambling for composure. "This is a personal matter. Elizabeth is overstepping her bounds." "She's not." Hartridge replied, his voice sharp. "If there's a conflict of interest that threatens the stability of our partnership, it's very much a board matter." Jordan's eyes darted between Hartridge and Elizabeth. For the first time, he seemed cornered, uncertain how to proceed. Ava shot Elizabeth a lethal glare, realizing that Elizabeth's boldness had forced the topic into official territory. The tension was palpable. Elizabeth's heart thumped so loudly, she was certain everyone could hear it. But she stood her ground. Continuing. "I also discovered lines of credit being taken against marital properties to fund expansions. These expansions could be legitimate, but the details are obscured. I have reason to believe Ms. Monroe is manipulating these finances for her personal gain." Murmurs rippled through the board. A couple members exchanged uneasy glances. Even those who might have sided with Jordan seemed rattled by the magnitude of Elizabeth's accusations. Hartridge steepled his fingers, evaluating the situation. "I propose we recess for 15 minutes. Jordan, Elizabeth, Ms. Monroe, please step into my office." Jordan inhaled frustration etched across his features, but he couldn't refuse the CEO's request, not without causing a catastrophic scene. The three followed Hartridge into a glass-walled corner office, shutting the door behind them. In that tense, enclosed space, the real battle began. Elizabeth laid out her evidence on the polished table before Hartridge. Jordan tried to dismiss it all as a personal dispute, but Hartridge was no fool. He could see the potential for scandal, especially if a partner was using company infrastructure for personal vendettas. Throughout this heated exchange, Ava attempted to deflect blame. She portrayed herself as a legal advisor, merely suggesting financial moves, disclaiming any wrongdoing. But Elizabeth's carefully compiled documents suggested otherwise. Emails, text messages, and proposed legal documents bore Ava's digital fingerprints. Hartridge's expression darkened. "Jordan, this is unacceptable. If these documents are authentic, you've put your personal entanglements ahead of corporate responsibility. I won't allow it under my leadership." Jordan's face went pale. He tried to protest, to label Elizabeth's claims as overblown, but Hartridge had already made up his mind. "Until this is sorted out, Jordan, I'm placing your proposals on hold. We can't move forward with any major financial changes if they're under this sort of ethical cloud." Elizabeth felt a surge of relief, a faint vindication. While she hadn't resolved the core issue of Jordan's betrayal, at least the board wasn't letting him run roughshod over her financial future. But Jordan, cornered and embarrassed, lashed out in desperation. "You can't shut me down like this," he snapped at Hartridge, voice tight with anger. "I'm the one who made that original deal with your conglomerate. You need my innovation." Hartridge stood up, bristling at Jordan's tone. "I'm the CEO, and you've just made me question your reliability and integrity. Watch yourself, Jordan." Ava stepped closer to Jordan, placing a hand on his arm to calm him, but he shrugged her off. "You'll regret this," he warned Hartridge. Then turned to Elizabeth. "And you made a fool of me in front of everyone." Elizabeth clenched her fists, refusing to cower. "You did that to yourself," she said, voice trembling with both fear and resolve. Jordan stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Ava followed quickly, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Hartridge sighed, looking at Elizabeth, who was holding back tears. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," Hartridge said. "I'm sorry about your personal struggles, but I have to protect the board's interests. If you need anything, contact my office. I'm not a family court judge, but I won't let Jordan drag the company down." With that, Elizabeth let out a shaky breath. She had achieved a small but crucial victory, yet she couldn't shake the nagging sense that Jordan, humiliated and cornered, was far from finished. She left the skyscraper, stepping out into the bright Dallas sun, uncertain, but determined. Little did she know this chapter was only the start of a far more explosive confrontation, one that would involve security teams, sudden betrayals, and a twist that would bring Jordan himself to his knees. Life outside the mansion was lonely, but Elizabeth was thankful for the reprieve from Ava's manipulations. She rented a small apartment near downtown Austin and used what funds she had left to secure her basic needs, while Michelle continued to press for a financial freeze on Jordan's assets. In the weeks following the tense board meeting, Jordan went surprisingly quiet. No more legal letters arrived. No more credit lines were sabotaged. He didn't attempt to contact Elizabeth, nor did Ava. Instead, it seemed as though they had retreated into some silent fortress, likely strategizing their next move. Elizabeth took advantage of the lull. She reconnected with old friends and mentors, explaining partially at least what she was going through. While many were shocked, they offered support in the form of references, moral encouragement, and occasional leads for a stable job or a business partnership. Despite the heartbreak, Elizabeth discovered a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just a passive bystander in Jordan's world. She had her own capabilities, her own strengths. Slowly, she started consulting for small tech firms, using her communications and PR background to help them craft compelling pitches. It wasn't a fortune, but it was honest work that reminded her she could stand on her own 2 feet. Then one evening, she received a phone call from an unknown number. A crisp, professional voice greeted her. "Hello, Elizabeth. This is Patricia Carlson. I'm an executive assistant at Tesla, working under Elon Musk's leadership team." Elizabeth's heart thudded. She had met Patricia briefly at a tech conference in Berlin 2 years ago, but they'd never exchanged more than pleasantries. "How can I help you?" Elizabeth asked, mind racing. Patricia hesitated. "I might have information relevant to your predicament with Jordan. Let's just say some of our legal divisions have been observing Ava Monroe for a while, and some red flags have come up." Red flags. Elizabeth's curiosity flared. "You're investigating her?" A slow exhale from the other end. "Our major concern is that she's potentially engaged in insider trading, or at least something that veers close to it. She's been known to manipulate powerful men to gain inside info on deals, especially around new technologies. We don't have direct evidence, but we do know that she's heavily involved in your husband's finances. We suspect she might be siphoning resources for her own agendas." Elizabeth's mind reeled. This was bigger than a domestic spat. Ava might be leveraging Jordan's resources and connections to stake her own claims in the tech world. That explained the sudden shifts in finances, the new trust accounts, and the lines of credit. Patricia continued. "We want to bring her down, but we need more information. You, Elizabeth, might be in a unique position to gather that." Elizabeth tapped her fingers on the kitchen counter. "Isn't that something your legal team handles?" A rueful laugh. "Yes, but we need Jordan's direct involvement. We suspect he's unwittingly giving her access to confidential materials through corporate crossovers or joint ventures. If you can help us prove it, we can kill two birds with one stone, protect Tesla's proprietary data, and help you gain leverage in your divorce. Elizabeth considered the offer. It was risky. If Ava was truly up to something illegal, Elizabeth could expose herself to potential backlash, but the lure of finally getting the upper hand was strong. "I'll do what I can," Elizabeth replied cautiously. "But how do I communicate with you about this?" Patricia gave her a secure email address and instructions on how to encrypt files. "And one more thing," Patricia said, before hanging up. "People like Ava are cunning. She'll anticipate your every move. Don't trust phone lines or any device that Jordan has access to. Be careful." Elizabeth thanked her and ended the call. Adrenaline coursing through her. For the next few days, she scoured her digital archives for anything that might hint at insider information. Jordan's old emails messages about collaborations with major tech companies like Tesla or Amazon, documents that Ava might have manipulated anything that showed a trail of questionable activity. She found a few suspicious threads, forwarded emails from Jordan's corporate account that were CC'd to Ava's personal address. Attachments relating to Tesla's Project Next Gen battery were among them, though none of this was strictly proof of wrongdoing yet. Elizabeth compiled what she could and sent them to the secure email Patricia provided. In response, Patricia confirmed that these were valuable leads, but incomplete. "Keep digging," she urged, "and let me know if you get direct evidence of deals or monetary gains tied to these inside details." Meanwhile, Michelle Elizabeth's lawyer was preparing for a preliminary hearing to freeze some of Jordan's assets. She insisted Elizabeth come to court to testify about the financial abuse and the suspicious activities they had uncovered. But Jordan's side surprised them by agreeing to a partial freeze without argument. "That's strange," Michelle said, tapping a pen against the conference table. "Why would he agree so easily?" Elizabeth shrugged, perplexed. "Maybe he realizes fighting me will look bad in front of the board." But Michelle wasn't convinced. "I suspect he's preparing a bigger move. Be vigilant. He may have more leverage than we know." The next morning, Elizabeth received an unsolicited text from Jordan. "We need to talk, face to face." She felt a swirl of conflicting emotions: anger, sorrow, curiosity. But she knew she had to tread carefully. She agreed to meet him in a public place, a cafe near the courthouse, where she could keep the upper hand. When Jordan arrived, he looked tired, as though the weight of his troubles had worn him down. He offered a half smile, which Elizabeth did not return. "Liz," he began using the old nickname he once uttered, with affection. Things got out of hand. She crossed her arms. "You think—" He sighed, scanning her face for warmth that was no longer there. "I want to settle this amicably. We can discuss spousal support, property divisions, everything. No need for a long, nasty court battle." Elizabeth let the silence hover. She wasn't naive enough to believe him at face value. "Amicably? Are you telling me Ava is out of the picture?" Jordan's shoulders tensed. "This is about you and me, not her. Look, maybe I got carried away with Ava's advice. She's a brilliant attorney." "She's manipulative," Elizabeth cut in sharply. He brushed the point aside. "Regardless, I'm willing to compromise, but I need you to lay off this insider trading nonsense. It's reckless. You're endangering my reputation." Elizabeth realized then that Jordan knew she'd been snooping into his communications. Perhaps Tesla's legal inquiries had begun reverberating in his circle. She saw the fear in his eyes. He was worried, if not about losing her, then about losing his empire. "You made me the enemy," Elizabeth replied, in a hushed, trembling tone. "When you let your mistress cut off my cards and throw me out of my home." Jordan looked away, shame flickering on his face. "I didn't handle that well. But you have to understand the pressure I'm under with these deals." She waited, letting him squirm. Then he continued, "You'll get a fair share. I promise. I just need you to stop meddling in my professional affairs, especially with Tesla or any other major collaborators. You'll ruin me if you do." A bitter laugh escaped Elizabeth. She thought of all the times she had stood beside him, protecting him, representing him before powerful players, forging alliances that were crucial to his success. Now he was pleading for her, not to ruin him. The irony nearly choked her. Before she could respond, Jordan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and muttered a soft curse. "I have to go," he said, throwing some cash on the table for their untouched coffees. Elizabeth watched him leave, a mixture of pity and disdain swirling in her stomach. It was obvious he was desperate, but was this a genuine attempt at reconciliation, or a ploy to keep her from uncovering more incriminating information about Ava? That question lingered as she returned to her apartment, drained. However, a new email from Patricia waited in her inbox. It contained an attachment, a partial timeline of suspicious trades linked to accounts rumored to be controlled by Ava Monroe. There were large bets placed on Tesla's stock ahead of public announcements. Gains in the tens of millions. This is huge, Elizabeth thought. If she connected these trades to emails or calls between Jordan and Ava, it could be the smoking gun. And while Elizabeth had no intention of going to the feds on her own, Tesla's legal team could bury Ava, and by extension, Jordan's complicity, if he was involved. Elizabeth clutched her phone, anxiety coursing through her. She was walking a razor's edge. One false step, and Jordan might retaliate more fiercely, or Ava might strike. But a successful strike against Ava could free Elizabeth from this entire ordeal, giving her the leverage to secure a fair divorce settlement, or even land Jordan in deeper trouble, depending on his role. She reached for her phone to text Patricia when it buzzed in her hand. A call from an unknown number again. Tentatively, Elizabeth answered. A man's voice greeted her, calm and steady. "Hello, Ms. Alberts. My name is Gregory Shaw. I'm part of CEO David Hartridge's legal counsel. He asked me to follow up regarding the situation with your husband." Elizabeth's heart skipped. Hartridge's legal counsel. "We understand from Mr. Hartridge's conversation with you that there might be unethical or even illegal behavior in play," Gregory continued. "The board is concerned about potential liability if Jordan's personal dealings spill into our corporate structure. We can't risk another scandal. Mr. Hartridge would like to assist you discreetly." Elizabeth exhaled slowly. She was on the cusp of powerful alliances forming against Jordan and Ava, but the more people got involved, the more dangerous it felt. Gregory concluded, "We'll be in touch with your lawyer. If you have any crucial evidence, Mr. Hartridge suggests you keep it secure. He wants to avoid a public meltdown, but he's prepared to do what's necessary to protect the company's interests, and that includes supporting you in your legal disputes if it comes to that." Hanging up. Elizabeth felt a measure of validation. The cracks in Jordan's seemingly untouchable world were growing. Perhaps justice would prevail. Yet as she prepared to finalize the next round of documents for Michelle, a gnawing worry kept her awake at night. Cornered animals are the most dangerous, and Jordan, though once gentle and loving, had shown he could be ruthless when threatened. She braced herself for the storm that was surely coming. The next time Elizabeth saw Jordan in person, it wasn't by chance or a carefully arranged meeting. It was at the headquarters of Hartridge's conglomerate in Dallas. A sudden emergency board session had been called to address urgent corporate matters, and Elizabeth, having been notified by Gregory Shaw, arrived prepared. She walked into the reception area, her heart pounding with anticipation. Michelle Liu had insisted on accompanying her, but at the last minute she was called to handle a crucial filing. Elizabeth went alone, relying on the moral support from Gregory and the knowledge that Hartridge wanted the truth on record. Jordan was already inside the boardroom with Ava, who paced like a clad tiger. When Elizabeth entered, they both snapped their heads in her direction. Ava's glare could have sliced glass. Jordan's face was inscrutable, tense, angry, but also tinged with fear. Hartridge arrived moments later, trailed by a few board members and legal advisors. He wasted no time in stating the purpose of the meeting. Allegations have come to my attention that Ms. Monroe has been engaging in stock trades leveraging proprietary information from Jordan's company and potentially from our own collaborations. We need to clarify the truth. Now. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Ava's jaw clenched. This is preposterous, she began. We demand to see your proof. Hartridge nodded to one of his advisors, who distributed printed documents, timelines of suspicious trades tied to accounts flagged by Tesla's legal team, along with correspondences that Elizabeth and Patricia had pieced together. Jordan snatched a packet from the advisor. His eyes swept over the page's color, draining from his face. Ava's lips thinned, and for a moment Elizabeth could see the faintest flicker of panic in her eyes. Hartridge pinned them with a stern gaze. Jordan, you've been a valuable partner. I don't want to see your personal life derail your professional standing. But this is bigger than your marriage. Insider trading is a federal crime. And if Ms. Monroe is using your business resources to pull this off, you're implicated. Ava recovered quickly. She placed a hand on Jordan's arm, her voice smooth. This is a misunderstanding, David. Anyone can align stock trades with corporate announcements. It's called speculation. Elizabeth decided enough was enough. She stood. Speculation is one thing, but forwarding private emails, entire business proposals, and preliminary press releases is not speculation. I've seen the messages. You're literally discussing the best times to execute trades based on announcements that hadn't been made public yet. Ava whirled on Elizabeth. You have no legal standing to claim that. You're just a scorned wife trying to sabotage Jordan and me. Elizabeth's blood boiled. We'll let the evidence speak. There are even time-stamped emails from Jordan's corporate account sent to your personal email, Ms. Monroe, discussing upcoming expansions and product launches. Then trades were executed in your name or trusts linked to you within hours. A hush followed. Jordan's hands shook slightly. He seemed torn between denial and guilt. After all, the evidence was damning. If he denied it outright, he'd appear foolish. But if he admitted his involvement, he risked criminal charges and the wrath of the board. Hartridge leaned forward, his voice firm. Jordan, I need answers. Were you aware of these trades? Jordan stared at the table, words refusing to form. Finally, he managed Ava said it was all above board, that it was just normal investing. Ava let out a short laugh, but it sounded hollow. If you want to scapegoat me, Jordan, think carefully, she warned. We made certain deals in your name as well. Your signatures are on plenty of documents. The entire boardroom seemed to hold its breath. Hartridge addressed one of his legal advisers. "Have we sent this to the SEC?" "Not yet," the advisor responded. "We wanted to confront them first." Jordan shot to his feet, panic etched on his face. "No need to escalate it. We can handle this internally. If I undo the trades, repay any gains, repay tens of millions of dollars," Hartridge asked. "And that would just be the tip of the iceberg if the SEC digs deeper. This is out of our hands if they launch a formal investigation." Elizabeth watched Jordan unravel. This was the man who had once been so composed, so unstoppable. Now he was cornered, sweat beading on his forehead. Ava, too, looked like a wild animal backed into a corner, eyes darting around the room. At that moment, a building security guard appeared at the door, knocking softly. "Mr. Hartridge, you asked for security on standby," he announced quietly. "Thank you," Hartridge replied, his tone like steel. "I believe we might need you." Ava's eyes flitted towards the door, then back to Hartridge. She adopted a pleading tone. "David, you know me. I've handled legal matters for some of the biggest players in the industry. I would never do anything to jeopardize your trust." Hartridge's face remained stony. "I trusted Jordan, not you. And this evidence suggests you're at the center of a major ethical breach. If you don't have a verifiable explanation for each of these trades and how you obtained insider information, I have no choice but to protect the company from liability." Suddenly, Jordan snapped. Fear twisted into anger, and he pointed a trembling finger at Elizabeth. "You did this. You ruined everything because you couldn't handle that I moved on." Elizabeth steadied her breathing, preparing to reply. But Hartridge cut in calm yet firm. "Don't blame her for your poor decisions. You let your personal affair become a corporate liability." Something in Jordan cracked. He lunged toward Elizabeth as if to grab her documents or her phone, an irrational move likely spurred by desperation. But he never made contact. In a blink, the security guard stepped forward and intercepted Jordan, gripping his arms. "Stand down, sir," the guard said, voice authoritative. Jordan struggled, but the guard was a solid wall of muscle. Ava shrieked. "Let him go." "This is a private matter." Hartridge shook his head, anger coloring his features. "You just attempted to assault someone in my boardroom. Security remove Mr. Alberts from the premises." Jordan's eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't do that. I'm on the board." "Not anymore," Hartridge said grimly. "I can and I will. You're suspended pending an internal investigation. Once that concludes, we'll determine your status. Now go and take Ms. Monroe with you." A second guard stepped in, guiding Ava toward the door as she protested threatening lawsuits and defamation claims. But her words rang hollow, overshadowed by the looming specter of an SEC investigation. Elizabeth stood off to the side, stunned by how quickly it had escalated from a tension-filled meeting to an outright meltdown. As Jordan and Ava were led out, Jordan craned his neck to shout at her. "You'll pay for this, Elizabeth. Don't think you've won." But the threat carried little weight now. In that moment, Elizabeth felt the mixture of triumph and sorrow that comes with toppling a man she once loved. She hadn't wanted to see Jordan destroyed, only to protect herself and the life they had built together. But Jordan's actions and Ava's ambition had forced her hand. Hartridge dismissed the board members, soon after instructing his legal team to cooperate fully with any investigations. He turned to Elizabeth with a sympathetic frown. "I'm sorry you had to endure this, Miss Alberts. I assure you we'll handle it lawfully. Whatever personal or marital disputes remain, I hope you find closure." Elizabeth gave him a small nod. "Thank you. I appreciate your fairness." She gathered her documents and left the skyscraper, the bright Texas sun striking her face as she stepped onto the street. The entire drama replayed in her mind. He let his mistress cut off my cards, but the CEO called security on him. She thought a bitter yet satisfying sense of irony spreading in her chest. She wasn't naive enough to think it was over. Legal battles would continue, depositions would be taken, and the divorce was far from final. But in this pivotal moment, she had taken back her power, standing against the storm that Jordan and Ava had unleashed. And for the first time in months, Elizabeth felt a glimmer of hope that she might in the end be free from their tyranny. In the weeks that followed, word spread like wildfire. News outlets picked up on rumors of insider trading linked to a high-profile tech investor, hinting that a major name was under investigation. It didn't take long for the rumor mill to connect the dots to Jordan Alberts and his mysterious attorney-turned-partner, Ava Monroe. Elizabeth watched from the sidelines, inundated with calls and messages from acquaintances, reporters, and sometimes even old college classmates she hadn't spoken to in years. She ignored most of them, preferring to let the legal process unfold without adding fuel to the media frenzy. Jordan, under immense legal and financial pressure, attempted to strike a deal if Elizabeth agreed to keep quiet and not testify against him or Ava. Regarding insider trading, he would give her a generous divorce settlement. The settlement included alimony, a hefty lump sum, and properties that would secure her financial future. However, Elizabeth refused any agreement that required her to lie or withhold the truth if subpoenaed. Nonetheless, she allowed her lawyer Michelle to work out a fair settlement that didn't involve perjury. Eventually, Jordan capitulated, realizing he had to salvage what he could from the marriage and business meltdown. The final settlement granted Elizabeth a significant portion of the assets, the mansion by Lake Travis, ironically, and a sizable share of Jordan's original tech startup. Meanwhile, Ava disappeared from the public eye, her reputation in tatters. Rumors surfaced that she'd fled the country, perhaps to avoid legal repercussions, while others suggested she was hiding out in some luxury villa, waiting for the storm to pass. Either way, her days of meddling in Jordan's finances seemed to be over. Elizabeth didn't celebrate Jordan's downfall. She quietly grieved the end of a marriage that had started in love and partnership, yet she also felt relief and a renewed sense of self. She returned to the Lake Travis mansion, deciding whether to keep it or sell. The sweeping views of the water brought back memories, some of which felt like knives to her heart, others that warmed her soul. She began a new chapter in her life, leveraging her PR skills to start a consultancy focused on helping women entrepreneurs navigate both business and personal challenges. She named it Phoenix Rose Consulting, symbolizing rebirth and resilience. To her surprise, she found more joy in championing other women than she ever did, standing behind Jordan at glitzy galas. She kept in touch with Patricia from Tesla, who occasionally updated her on the ongoing investigations. Whether Jordan faced criminal charges depended on further evidence. But at least for Elizabeth, the immediate threat to her assets and well-being had lifted. David Hartridge reached out, once inviting Elizabeth to a dinner with the board, presumably to mend fences. Elizabeth politely declined. She had no desire to relive the tension of board meetings or navigate corporate politics, where her personal life became public fodder. She was grateful for Hartridge's stance, but preferred to build her future away from the chaos. In moments of solitude, Elizabeth reflected on the entire ordeal. She'd once believed that love, loyalty, and shared ambition could conquer anything. Yet she also realized that unchecked power and ego could corrode even the strongest of bonds. Jordan's betrayal had been a painful lesson, but it set her free to discover her own strengths and a life not tethered to someone else's rising star. Yes, heartbreak lingered, and healing was an ongoing process. But Elizabeth found herself waking each day with a sense of purpose. She'd gather with female founders at local co-working spaces, host workshops on media relations, and offer moral support to those feeling overshadowed by bigger players. Each time she saw a spark of confidence ignite in another woman's eyes, she felt her own sense of wholeness return. In time, Elizabeth would finalize the divorce, sign the deeds, and officially start over. A sense of calm settled within her, like the slow, tranquil waves on Lake Travis at dawn. Her story, the humiliating card cancellations, the public meltdown, the mistress's meddling, would become a cautionary tale, one she shared sparingly, only when it might help others. Despite the scars, Elizabeth refused to let bitterness define her. She chose growth empathy and a belief that with the right support, anyone can rise from the ashes more formidable than before. Just as Elizabeth thought she had reached stable ground, fate tossed her another curveball. A month after the settlement, Michelle called her urgently. "The feds want to depose you," she said. They uncovered new evidence Jordan may be involved in deeper crimes, bribery, money laundering. Ava might have orchestrated a network. Elizabeth's stomach dropped. Jordan never mentioned anything like that. They've found offshore transactions and documents with his signature, Michelle said grimly. 2 days later, Elizabeth sat in a stark federal office, flanked by Michelle and 2 serious agents. They questioned her about Jordan's finances, Ava's role, the card cancellations, and philanthropic events that may have masked backdoor deals. Elizabeth stuck to the facts. She neither speculated nor dramatized. One agent, impressed, said, "You've been very helpful, Ms. Alberts. This case is significant." She left emotionally drained but relieved. She hadn't been dragged down with Jordan, but the storm wasn't over. Whispers followed Jordan was hiding at a secluded ranch, dodging the press. Ava had vanished. More subpoenas were issued. An indictment loomed. Elizabeth stayed focused on her consultancy, channeling stress into helping other women navigate business pitfalls. Her story, once painful, became a symbol of warning and strength. Then came the headlines: Jordan Alberts indicted for insider trading, fraud, and obstruction. Ava was named but still missing. The scandal rocked the tech world. Elizabeth issued a single statement. "I'm saddened by Jordan's choices. I've cooperated fully with authorities and continue to rebuild my life." Eventually, Jordan pled guilty to a lesser charge, offering a tearful courtroom apology. Elizabeth watched from home, tears in her eyes, not from triumph, but quiet grief for the man she once loved. Still, she understood consequences had to follow actions. That night, beneath the soft moonlight over Lake Travis, Elizabeth allowed herself one last cry for the past that died and the hope still waiting ahead. Life has a way of testing our fortitude when we least expect it. Elizabeth Alberts began this journey as a devoted wife, only to see her world upended by betrayal and financial sabotage. Yet what she lost in illusions, she gained in unbreakable resilience. Standing up to powerful forces and calling out wrongdoing isn't easy, but it's sometimes the only way to protect your dignity and your future. If you found this story gripping, insightful, or inspiring, we invite you to be a part of our community. Like this video, share it with friends who need a reminder that courage can emerge from chaos and subscribe for more real-life drama and empowering tales. Let Elizabeth's story serve as a beacon, no matter how ruthless the betrayal. There's always a path to reclaim your power and build a brighter tomorrow. You too can rise like a phoenix.